I'm Steve Coll. I'm the author of Private Empire, ExxonMobil American Power. Wear lots of other hats too, but that's the main one at the moment. I think that's right. I mean, I think that there's a lot of incoherence in the politics of energy and energy policy, except that one very large, durable, coherent corporation is sitting right in the middle of our political economy, and they have coherence that the Department of Energy, the environmental movement, and other players, don't always have. I think there are probably a more practically important and effective representation of what our actual energy policy is than the Department of Energy is, for example, and their scale is larger. But on the environmental side, in the NGO world in general, there's an enormous amount of diversity and fragmentation. No question about it. There is not a galvanizing crisis or perception that is unifying the environmental movement or the NGO around common cause. It's not global warming because public opinion isn't there, in part because companies like ExxonMobil managed to sow doubts about the validity of climate science in its embryonic phase. There's not a perception that air pollution or water pollution or the risks of catastrophic oil spills or the risks of global warming pose an acute threat to living generations. That's when the American people normally, in their, sloppy, zigzagging sort of way, will very rapidly impose costs on themselves in order to address environmental problems. If the threat of air pollution or water pollution is documented to increase the risks that living family members will contract debilitating or fatal diseases, then you're willing to pay higher taxes. But if it's something that's a little more indirect and in the future, and you're not even sure what it really amounts to, as in global warming, then you're not willing to pay that price. And I think the only rationale for creating sustained changes in the way we price energy so as to incent the development of more sustainable alternatives, the only real rationale is global warming. I mean, you can make a case for energy independence and talk yourself into solar and wind, but it's a pretty indirect case because our oil imports are a problem for our trade deficit. But even if we didn't import a barrel of oil, we'd still be beholden to the Middle East for a lot of different reasons. So, I think what's interesting to me about the global warming problem as a political problem is that is this question of future versus living generations. Because in Australia, that's a country that's basically a coal mine. It's a giant natural resources economy. And they had politics that were deeply unfavorable to carbon pricing. And we and the Australians were like the two outliers in the global system in our attitudes towards Kyoto and global warming. And they just enacted a carbon price. Why? They had a Labour government, but that didn't mean that they had enough of a parliament to get it through, just as Obama couldn't get it through. The reason, I think, is that they had the worst drought in 50 years, and it scared them. It basically, they have no topsoil. And I think they sort of said to themselves in some way, people did make this argument, this is not a future threat, it's here now. And if we don't start to take it seriously, we could end up acting too late to save Australia as a viable, sustainable community of 20 or 30 million, however many people live there. And that sense that it's arrived, that the threat is here, that it's meaningful, that it could affect current farmers and current livelihoods, that is absent in the United States. When will it come? we're living in very hot times. Yeah, I think the only it's interesting. The Department of the Interior doesn't worry them. They captured that pretty thoroughly, as we saw in the Deepwater Horizon case. I think at the state and local level, especially in the southwestern politically friendly states where they produce a lot of the gas that they own, which otherwise could be environmentally problematic, they try to stay away from blue states. They don't own natural gas in New York for a reason, I think. I think the only regulatory agency that worries them and gets their attention, that is strong enough to compete with them, is the EPA. I think that's true in the energy industry generally. And now the EPA is a political organization that changes with the White House. And so that explains some of their alignment with the Republican Party and that of other oil and coal corporations. But the EPA is sort of this odd hybrid of both a political agency whose philosophy of regulation can be changed with the presidency, but also a permanent bureaucracy that has established its rules in law and then has its rules constantly ratified by the courts. So it's a big complex that sort of starts with whoever is in the White House, runs through the leadership of the EPA, then into the science-based, durable bureaucracy of the EPA, and then out into litigation, because everything is litigated that they do, and then established in court-supervised regimes. That's the actual energy regulation that ExxonMobil cannot defeat, has to live with, and constantly tries to influence, but I don't think they are as effective there as they are in many other areas of regulatory capture.